Welcome, book clubbers. I am your host, Megan, and I'm super excited for this book club meeting today because we're here with Dr. Nick Walker, the author of this new book, Neuroqueer Heresies, Notes on the Neurodiversity Paradigm, Autistic Empowerment, and Post-Normal Possibilities. And your resume is like a mile long, so I'm going to highlight a few things. You are the professor of psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. That's right. Okay, good. And you are the co-founder of Autonomous Press, which is the publisher for this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wish I had known about this before, but it's okay. You are also the co-creator of Weird Luck, which is a webcomic, which is very cool, and an instructor, and is it Aikido? Aikido instructor at the Aiki Art Center in Berkeley, and you talk a lot about that in the book, which is very cool. And we have your link if anybody wants to get this book. The moderators are putting the links in the comment section. So welcome. What did I miss? Anything?
I think you got a lot of it. You got the highlights.
I mean, you've been in the game for like ever. You were in Loud Hands. You were doing autistic advocacy like in the chat rooms, AOL, like yeah, that kind of like dial-up chat rooms before the internet was the internet it is now.
Yeah, I mean, at least before all of the present social media platforms. Since 2003, which I mean, I still think of myself as a relative newcomer just because so much important work happened in the 90s.
It did. Bobby said, I devoured the book, read it all nonstop, highly recommended. I'm going to talk about the book for a little bit. So I'll be honest with you, this book is really surprising to me. So I started out reading it kind of intimidated because the title is a little intimidating to me. Neuroqueer is something I had never even heard of before. Heresies is a big word. I like the word, but I went into the book thinking I'm not gonna get it, or like just trying to keep up with the book, right? And it was surprising to me because when I got to page 109, I stopped reading. And I was like, Megan, you're just not even processing this book correctly. It was when you started talking about Autism Speaks. And I sent you that message and I was like, we need to make a sticker out of that quote. And I stopped reading the book and I started over. Because I wasn't reading for understanding. I was just reading to keep up. And this book it was nothing like what I expected. It is really 2/3 of this book is an entry-level book for people that are new to the world of autism. There are definitions in here. This is like a reference book for people who, if somebody asks, what is neurodiversity? You can say, oh, let me quote this book because the basic definitions are in here. What is neurodivergent? What is, what are the issues around first person language and identity first language? All of that is packed inside of this book. So yeah, I got to page 109 and I started over and I really started interacting with the book. So you'll see here.
Awesome.
Yes. And it really did. It changed my view of it. And so for anybody that might be intimidated by this book, don't be, because it is fantastic and it is a must read. I mean, it is a reference book for anybody who has a library on autism books. I mean, on autism theory, on autism, everything. So thank you for writing this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for reading it.
It's amazing. And so how did you come about writing this? You did talk about this in the book, but I do want you to kind of explain why you wrote it, because I thought that the story was really important.
Yeah, there were a few different factors. I was writing things on neurodiversity and the neurodiversity paradigm and such starting around, as I said, in 2003. I was involved in all these online discussions and private forums that predate Facebook and all that. I was involved in these uh, early discussions where the neurodiversity movement and the concept of the neurodiversity paradigm took shape. And I coined the term neurodiversity had been coined a little bit before I came along in the 90s. It's often wrongly credited to Judy Singer, but Judy was just the first person to uh, use it in academic work. The term neurodiversity was actually kicking around private autistic listservs and such from the mid 90s. And so its origins sort of are a little obscured now, but that term had been around for a while, but its implications were still being played with in the autistic community. It hadn't really uh, come into any sort of mainstream awareness, even in 2003, even though it had been around for a while at that point. And I coined this term, the neurodiversity paradigm, uh, to refer to uh, a particular set of premises and ideas that we could work from for building a less oppressive approach to neurodiversity. And so I'd been writing about that and sort of articulating the neurodiversity paradigm and its implications and these other ideas in private forums for a long time. And it wasn't until 2011 that I finally wrote something about it for publication. And I wrote this essay for that first got published in the Loud Hands anthology called Throw Away the Master's Tools, Liberating Ourselves from the Pathology Paradigm, which is what the book opens with.
I want to
And
talk about that in a minute too.
oh, yeah,
Keep going.
absolutely. And so that sort of sparked for me a series of essays on over time, just published mostly just on my website, a series of essays on just sort of basics about uh, autistic empowerment, about the neurodiversity paradigm, and things that took shape. Some of these essays emerged from my grad school papers. I was like, oh, maybe I can just take this and stick it into an essay and revise a little bit to make it less academical and whatnot. And so uh, I had this sense for a while that, I should put this stuff into a book. And people certainly asked me a lot to put it into a book. Uh, and I'd kind of tapered off writing that stuff. Around 2016, 2017, I made a big shift into more writing comics and fiction, and I hadn't really been that inspired to produce any more essays, but there were ideas growing for me and developing and happening in my academic work outside of the public sphere. And I was teaching. I teach a course at California Institute of Integral Studies in the undergrad psych program called Introduction to Neurodiversity Studies. And so also teaching informed me because I kept thinking I really need to write something I can use as an introductory textbook for undergraduates because I'm tired of answering the same questions every semester. And so I started putting this book together. Um, and there were a bunch of things that inspired it, partly this undergrad class, and other things I don't talk about in the book, like the first neurodiversity studies academic book came out, and just a couple of years ago, and it was a huge disappointment to me. And so I felt that uh, the field was inadequate in my view and needed something else. So yeah, a lot of different things playing into it. And so I started putting this book together, and I thought it would be very short. It is still pretty short, but I started putting the book together and say, well, okay, well, this is my last chance. Like, okay, what am I? And I mean, I hate writing essays. Is another thing. I can't stand it. So part
That's
of this was the sense
interesting
that
to
I
me.
was, yeah, part of this was a sense that this is like the last time I'm going to have to do this. So I said, I'll put together these essays, and I have new things to say about them. So I'll put in commentary about them, introductions. This is what was going on. This is the context for when I wrote this. This is how my views have shifted or what's happened since. A lot of things like that. And then I was like, this is my last chance. If I'm going to assign this in my class, like, what am I tired of explaining? I'm tired of explaining the social model of disability to undergraduates. Like, they should have been taught this stuff in elementary school and they weren't. And there needs to be a chapter on neurodivergence and the social model of disability. And so I'm putting that in. It's time for me to write that. And it just sort of piled up of like, oh, here's another thing I need to put in. And then, of course, I close the book. The most of part 3 is the very long essay about neuroqueer theory, which I've been meaning to put out into the world for quite some time. And I was like, let's lead up to this. Let's make this where sort of the conclusion the book leads to. And so yeah, I ended up writing a lot more than I expected. And so the book is sort of like maybe a third to half of it is essays I put out into the world over the course of a decade, and the rest is completely new material. And I put it together not in the order I wrote it, but in what order makes sense, what order will help take a
To
reader
consume it.
through
Yeah.
these ideas. So yeah, that's the basic origin story.
I still have a follow-up question to that.
Oh
So
yeah.
this class that you're teaching,
Hmm.
it's in a psychology program, right? These
Yeah.
kids are not kids, sorry. These young adults or whoever is taking it is they're taking a psychology major basically, right?
Yes,
And so
Bachelor of Science in Psychology.
is this class that you're teaching in place of abnormal psychology?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is
Yes, it's
so they don't have
it's meeting
abnormal.
the abnormal psych requirement. Yes.
So, so how are you going to duplicate that at every college? Do you have a plan for that?
I don't have a plan for that. I'm not an administrator. I don't have the authority. I wrote the book, and I'm hoping, I'm hearing from instructors, around the English speaking world right now who are assigning it in their classes. So that's happening. And I think that can happen, and really it's about who designs the programs. And I mean, I'm fortunate to be uh, Dr. Chris Brandenberger, who runs the whole undergrad studies department at California Institute of Integral Studies, really gets this stuff and really had this intention to create a psychology program that had a very liberatory and
Progressive, yeah.
progressive and critical vibe to it throughout the whole program. Really, it's got like a Black psychology concentration developing and stuff. There's a lot of wonderful progressive stuff happening within the program and within the whole School of Undergrad Studies at CIIS, which is why I love to teach there. But that it proves that it can be done in a sense. I hear people so often saying things like, oh, you just can't do that, and education is so mainstream and so entrenched in these old paradigms. But
All you have
that's
to do is do it.
you have to do it. And that's the thing, is that this is an accredited program, where you get an accredited Bachelor of Science degree, and our students go on to graduate programs around
Nobody
the
asked
world.
them, like, did you take abnormal
I
psychology? Or, yeah,
mean,
nobody's looking for that.
yeah, they do. This meets the requirement
Yes.
because you can do that. There's no, like, okay, you're supposed to include abnormal psych of some kind, like, study of these cognitive variations and such in some way, but there's no law or like giant secret educational policy that says that you're required to pathologize cognitive variation, and you're required to teach within the pathology paradigm, and that abnormal psychology has to be based in enforcing societal standards of normativity. That's just the way things have been done, so it's got a certain inertia to it. But we can actually step outside of that at any time, and the system allows for it. People just imagine that it doesn't.
You just have to be a yes person. Like, the 2 summers ago, I held this unprofessional development. It was like a month-long unprofessional development. We had like all these people, doctors and teachers, administrators, parents, autistic advocates, all over, like from all over the world. And we were talking about how, I mean, this type of paradigm shift, right? This type of lens shift, it's got to happen in the teacher training programs, right? And the psychologist training programs, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
not, it's they're still taking abnormal psychology. So when I heard about this course that you were teaching, I wondered, I was like, well, maybe she did, swap it out, and this would be the first time
Mm-hmm.
that I'm hearing of that. And it's amazing to think of that possibility as actually coming to fruition.
Oh yeah, it can be done. People are doing this stuff, and this is what that key word in the subtitle of my book, and the title of the part 3 of the book, post-normal possibilities. And that's where my fascination always is when we decide to step outside old, dominant standards of normativity, what possibilities open up. And my whole work and life at this point is about engaging with the possible, and about the engaging the creative imagination towards exploring and realizing possibilities. And part of why I created the book and took it where I did, in terms of ending with this post-normal possibilities, and this long chapter on neuroqueer theory, is that that's the direction I think that it's crucial to take this stuff. That so much activism and advocacy work, and even scholarship and such, so much of it has this negative focus of only what's wrong, and how do we fight what's wrong. But very few people are talking about the creative possibilities, what can be created. And that's crucial, because otherwise you just I mean, there are problems and injustices that are actively happening that need to be opposed.
We need the solutions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
abuses that need to be stopped. But yes, positive solutions have to exist as an alternative to, what are we doing instead? Not just, otherwise we're just always uh, the work becomes entirely defensive. The work becomes about all these abuses are happening in the world, and we're just going to feel bad about it and be outraged by it and try to make it stop. But it's always happening somewhere. And the way to make real change in the long run, current abuses, we have to oppose to protect people who are, being subjected to abuses right now, but there has to be a better future in progress as well. And I see so little attention to that. Uh, people for the most part. And I think this is not just when it comes to autism or the broader sphere of neurodiversity. I think it's universal in just public and political discourse now is this culture of complaint we have going. It's all about the complaints and what's wrong and the sense of scarcity and who do we scapegoat and who do we cancel and what do we outlaw, and there's so little about what is beautiful that we can build and what are the positive solutions and better futures that we can build toward. And so in a sense, I open the book with that throwaway to master's tools chapter where I'm talking about the need for a paradigm shift, but I've very deliberately close with okay, if we make this shift, this isn't just about stop systemic injustice. This is actually about
what comes next.
What comes next and what comes now.
Yeah.
What comes now? We don't have to wait. I think that's what's happening. I think there's a mindset of we have to fix all of the problems before we can have any fun and have any joy and build anything positive. And that's garbage. That's a terrible idea. Do the positive stuff now. Be beautiful and fabulous and full of joy now. And that widens the cracks in all the systems of oppression and trouble and conflict. Just make space for the joy now. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's what we're living for. And live now. Don't think that life can't begin and beauty and happiness and imagination can't begin until all systems of oppression are ended, because that stuff never ends. There's always troubles. That's the human condition. That's the first noble truth of Buddhism. So just that's so much my focus is trying to get people to engage their creative imaginations and to engage with the possibility of something other than endless misery and outrage.
Well, and it's more of having a proactive attitude instead of a reactive one, really. Yeah. I totally get that. Let's talk about throw away the master's tools. This was I think this was the first essay you talked about in the book.
It is, and it's the oldest piece in the book.
But it's so relevant, right? And that one it ages very well, obviously. I think it's an important first chapter, really. It's basically talking about a lens shift, and that no change will happen if we're using the master's tools, which is using the lens from which the master has been using the whole time. You basically have to switch. You talk about the paradigm shifts, right? And how it's not just, it does start with the language we use, right? And we do have to shift that, but it's also completely rewiring how we're thinking of things, which is an example of what you're doing at your college, which is we're not doing an abnormal psychology, we're doing a neurodiversity studies, right? So that is throwing away the master's tools to some degree, right? And to a huge degree. I don't want to minimize that, obviously, because it's amazing. Do you want to talk about anything in there in particular? Because I do have a question for you, but is there anything you want to talk about in throwing away the master's tools?
No, hook me up with the question.
Okay, it's a specific question, and it's relevant for this time of year that we're in, right? And I know that autistic advocates, April is coming around the corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a traumatic time for lots of autistic advocates. It's almost like I almost want to keep my kids in the house all month, because I don't want them hearing anything about themselves and, all of this awareness trash that is going to be coming out there. What are your thoughts on the switch from Autism Awareness Month to Autism Acceptance Month? There is a switch going on, but is that not still using the master's tools? Or I mean, I'm asking just like as an open book. Tell me what you think about that. It just made me think of it because we're in this time. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's still autism, not autistic or anything like that. It's still talking about, the autisms. Do you have a thought on that?
I think, yeah, we can. Oh, on the one hand, I think we can always keep playing with how to make that shift better and how to subvert the pathology paradigm better, how to we can always play more with that and should, and there's so many ways to play with that creatively. And, I mean, we have an Autistic Pride Day, and why not push that, like, autism, from autism awareness to autism acceptance to autistic pride to just, autistic fabulousness month and
Empowerment.
autistic empowerment month, whatever. I mean, or ignore that whole thing entirely and say, just, yeah, people are going to do this, like, people are going to do this, whatever it is. They're going to call it autism awareness or call it autism acceptance or whatever. And we're just going to go about our lives and be fabulous and build good things. And we don't have to put any of our attention into this month. We don't have to fight for that territory. It doesn't matter if it's April or May or September. We're going to keep on existing and building community and building resources and mutual aid and, queering normativity and just, we're going to keep doing that year round. And so why even put energy into this? Let it be, I mean, let people who want to do that. But, like, I think I think this April is Autism Awareness Month, lighted up blue nonsense I think it's traumatic for autistic people because we pay attention to it, because the culture of complaint that has been cultivated says that whenever something happens like this, we have to be outraged by it. We have to engage with it. And that's just like, why? Choose to put your attention somewhere else. Attention is the only real human resource. Where we put our energy, where we put our attention, that's what we have. That's how we build our lives and build who we are, by where we put our attention. Do you want to put it on, like, every single opportunity to be outraged or upset by something, or do you want to keep it on something positive and creative that builds the world you want to see? And so, I mean, I don't find April traumatic or bothersome at all. It's not. I didn't, it's just, it's a thing I can engage with if I want. Like the fact that, there's all these autism related hashtags on social media and stuff. It's like, oh, I can use that if I have an idea I want to put out into the world. Like, I can take advantage of this with, like, an autism acceptance hashtag or something because it's April. That's the extent to which April, as some autism related thing, enters my awareness at all. And I think, um, you know, when I talk about liberating ourselves from, about autistic empowerment and about self-liberation, part of what I'm talking about is liberating our attention and liberating ourselves from some internalized requirement to be upset and outraged by things. And it's heresy these days. The title of the book is Neuroqueer Heresies, and I'm a heretic by, not just by the standards of the pathology paradigm in the mainstream, but I'm a heretic by the standards of autistic advocacy too, because I espouse the ultimate heresy, which is that it's possible to choose to not be offended by things.
Good answer. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
He said, oh, I'll put this up. I'm in a group that we're doing a live, all autistic, addressing what we hate about April and what can be done to make life actually better.
Well, if it were me, I would just drop the first part and focus on the second part of that. Yep, that's the way to go.
Nice.
Positive spin.
Awesome. Let's talk about neuroqueering.
Let's talk about it. Let's do it.
Yeah. So this was a completely new term for me, right? And it was a little confusing. And I'll be honest, I have follow-up questions, so I will be asking them today. But can you give us the basic definitions, like the last third of the book almost, or maybe a little bit more than that, is on neuroqueering and what it means to neuroqueer and be neuroqueer. Can you talk about what that is and also talk about it in relationship to, like, is it the same thing as being neurodivergent, or is it the same thing as being, like, can anybody be neuroqueer, or can anybody neuroqueer? I'm still processing, obviously, but it's interesting to me and I really like it. And what neuroqueering looks like in practice. That was my favorite part. So do you want to talk about what neuroqueer is?
I will. It's definitely not the same thing as being neurodivergent. And I think, I'll say something about neurodivergence too, but I talk about this in the book, that I think that it's an important word to understand and preserve the meaning of. And this
I like how you explained that.
Yeah, this was developed. It was developed by Cassiana Asasimasu, who is has been involved in autistic activism and pro neurodiversity paradigm autistic thinking even longer than me.
And
even
that's
though
Neurodivergent K, right, on social media?
That's right. Yeah. The blog, Radical Neurodivergent Speaking. Cassian is amazing. One of my heroes, and significantly younger than me, but had been at it longer than me, been at it since her teens.
Awesome.
And I think, it's, I'm very frustrated by, I think one thing that we're all more aware of these days is that autistic women and non-binary people, and any autistic person who's not a cis male tends to get erased very easily, and particularly a long history of autistic women being under-recognized. That's starting to shift in a big way. Autistic people of color still heavily erased and underrepresented in a lot of the discourse. And, Cassiana, as really the first heavily influential autistic woman of color in the field of autistic activism. Really, her contributions are under-recognized, and so I'm very committed to making sure that people recognize that her contributions don't get erased. And And there have been uh, you know definite efforts to erase or silence her, including by autistic-led organizations. So uh, the uh, so yeah, so in I mean, I think the term neurodivergent is really valuable, and I like to make sure, I mean, there's this whole like, oh, I don't even remember the book. Some book came out recently that got a lot of hype, was published by a mainstream publisher, some autistic guy uh, put out some book about his journey discovering he was autistic and stuff, and a lot of stuff that was like somehow news to the mainstream, even though that was not, I didn't see anything new in it. But he was very specific about crediting Judy Singer with the term neurodiversity, which again she did not coin, and used the term neurodivergent repeatedly without mentioning Cassiana. And I was like, this is wrong, and very typical.
Yeah.
So and people people use these other words that I don't think work as well, neuroatypical and stuff. Like, no, we've had this term neurodivergent for over 2 decades now, and it's a good one. So let's talk about that term. That Cassiana intended the term to be broadly inclusive as possible, that it's any divergence from dominant standards of neuronormativity.
I see that conversation a lot just in spaces that I'm in where, I'll even ask, like, so my brother, he has schizophrenia. And so would he be included in neurodivergence?
Yes.
Would he be neurodivergent? And, there are people that say, no, that's, that's not neurodivergent. That's like
it absolutely is, of course, because his neurocognitive functioning is different from the what dominant norms say it should be. That's the definition of neurodivergent. So right. Yes, so a key thing about neurodivergence is that it's not just innate neurodivergence like autism and ADHD, dyslexia. It's any form of neurodivergence, including acquired neurodivergence. And acquired neurodivergence can mean acquired through trauma. Mm-hmm. It can mean acquired by doing lots of psychedelics. It can mean all sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways that different forms of neurodivergence can come into being and can interact. I coined this term neurominority to specifically refer to innate styles of neurodivergence, identifiable groups like autistic people and dyslexic people, where there's an innate style of neurodivergence that pervasively affects the person's development and sort of shapes the character and personality in various ways, which is different from and which I think shouldn't we don't want to pathologize, that's this whole pathology paradigm, like, this neurodiversity movement, this push for the neurodiversity paradigm is like, don't pathologize autism, don't treat it as something that's a disease that needs to be cured, because that's ultimately harmful to autistic people. Don't do that with dyslexia. How do we accommodate it and work with it rather than stigmatizing it? On the other hand, and this is important, I think, there's nothing in the neurodiversity paradigm that says don't pathologize any neurodivergence. It specifically don't pathologize neurominorities like autistic people, because PTSD is neurodivergence, right? Your whole neurocognitive functioning is changed by trauma, but people who have PTSD want to be cured of it. It is like, it makes sense to treat PTSD as a disorder that needs to be cured.
Yeah, right.
It's because nobody wants it. Nobody's like
an injury.
Right. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be stigmatized. Nobody should be shamed for PTSD, but saying this is a disorder and I want treatment for my PTSD and I want to recover from it, heck yeah, I've spent decades recovering from PTSD. And so but that's also neurodivergence. So I think that sometimes the neurodiversity movement gets misrepresented as thinking that like nothing should be pathologized and nothing should be and suffering shouldn't be fixed and addressed. But of course, if you're neurodivergent in a way that's causing you suffering, yeah, do things to fix it. You got to have that right.
Anxiety, right? Exactly.
And yeah, and so I think that's we've digressed far from this question of
And it did
neuroqueer.
make me think of something else, Nick.
Yeah.
I loved in your What is Autism chapter, I loved the first sentence that you came up with because, and I'm going to use this now because it's hard to say like the condition, that's what you talk about, throwing away the master's tools. We shouldn't be using disorder. Condition is also a thing. And you say autism is a developmental phenomenon. And I love that. It's a lens shift, right? It is just there. It is part of, with the neurodiversity paradigm, it's just part of, it's a phenomenon that happens in your mind and in your, in your body mind, as you say in the book. And I love that script that you gave me to describe autism. Appreciate you for that.
Thank you. And I want to say something about language here that actually here's the thing about publishing a book that's terrible. Nobody warns you about this. If you publish a nonfiction book that's meaningful to you in any way, as soon as the book is out there, I immediately start thinking of things that I wish I'd put in it. Things come up. I see conversations on social media and stuff. I'm like, oh God, I should have addressed this in the book.
That is exactly what I thought, because I'm like, dang, I wish I had known the phenomenon before I wrote it.
So anyway,
already on a date.
So one of the key things there that I want to address about language. The language is important. Obviously, that's a theme in the book, like, not calling autism a disorder or a condition, and this distinction between, neurodivergence and being a neurominority, which is like a subset of being neurodivergent. Like some neurodivergent people are members of neurominority groups, like autistic people and dyslexic people, and people with Down syndrome, whereas PTSD is a whole different deal, but also qualifies as neurodivergence.
People who have drug-induced psychosis, that is not, you wouldn't consider that a neurominority because they're not oppressed in a way.
Well, I mean, they can be oppressed. They're just not. It's not sort of an innate like autism. Being autistic can function as a social identity. We have an autistic culture and community.
Yeah.
And I don't, we have an autistic culture that's about something other than, coping with the tragedy of autism. People form communities around PTSD or, drug-induced psychosis or something, or addiction, but those communities are about how can we help each other through this, rather than, nobody's got like a drug-induced psychosis pride movement going. I don't know that it would make a lot of sense.
That, right?
And I mean, obviously it shouldn't be stigmatized, but it's very clearly like, how can we help each other through this? And I think with autistic people, there's an autistic culture, and some of it is around mutual aid, and how do we help each other cope in a world that's not friendly to autistic people. But there's also just this culture of like, shared interests and excitements and such. And it's very clearly a social minority group, that functions in terms of intersectionality as like, okay, there's a, you know, how does it intersect other membership in other minority groups and other social groups? What does it mean to be a transgender autistic person or gay autistic person or a Black autistic person or Jewish autistic person? How do these various axes of identity intersect? So yeah, it functions, being autistic, it functions as a membership in a social minority group in terms of identity. And that's, I use the term minority to refer to that specific sort of neurodivergence. But again, this very inclusive blanket term neurodivergence is really essential. And when we're talking about something like neurominority group, we're talking about things that happen within the broader frame of neurodivergence, and preserving that inclusive intent that Cassiana brought to the term neurodivergence when she created that term, I think is really important. The but yeah, and also, as I note in the book, there is the neurodiversity movement has largely been a disability rights movement. It's very based on the social model of disability. How do we create social accommodations? The main reason to not pathologize autism, for instance, I think, is that it does more harm than good. I think just looking at actual lived autistic experience, being pathologized is not helping us. But looking to accommodate, like, okay, we are disabled in the sense of the systems and structures of how things are set up are not designed for us and create active barriers for us. And so social model of disability is like, how do we mitigate disability by accommodating people's needs? And so that's crucial. And that's crucial whether we're talking about autistic people or whether we're talking about PTSD or some other form of acquired neurodivergence. But a key point that I want to bring in here in terms of the inclusivity of the label of neurodivergence is that this concept of neurodiversity and the neurodiversity paradigm and neurodivergence is not limited to disability, and not all neurodivergent people are disabled. There are forms of neurodivergence. There are manifestations of neurodivergence that have nothing to do with disability in particular. I mean, I'm autistic and as such have dealt with a lot of barriers and obstacles in my life, and spent a lot of my 20s homeless because of systemic barriers and such. And so certainly I'm acutely aware of how autistic people are disabled within our society, and even more for autistic people who don't do oral speech. There's massive barriers to them, including the way that their intelligence is dismissed and openly doubted and such. So a lot of it.
Really interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but this was a really interesting piece in your book that you go through talking about disabled is the opposite of being enabled, and that a lot of it comes from how our society just doesn't accommodate. I mean, it just doesn't accommodate. And I remember one, I don't have it, like I'm trying to look for it, but you said we should be looking, when you talked about high functioning and low functioning, we shouldn't be looking at the person. We should be looking at how functioning is our society. Are they high functioning, like in in order to accommodate people, or do they function poorly in the sense that they are not accommodating to people? And I thought that was brilliant to switch that lens around, instead of looking at, I mean, obviously we should not be talking about high functioning, low functioning ever anymore. I mean, like, that should be gone, but we could do that to our society. And I thought that was brilliant.
Right. Well, thank you. So anyway, one of the points I make in the book, in that chapter on disability, is that, and this is really crucial to my work and where my focus is, there are, there is that aspect of autism. There's also aspects of being autistic, that don't have a lot to do with enablement, disablement, and such. Just, there's the way we engage with information, the way we cognitively process, in places where that's not accommodated. Yes, there's disablement occurring, but there's also just like this whole other realm of we just the creative potentials of how our minds work, or our capacities for joy and such, where if the discourse, it impoverishes the discourse on autism if it's only about our disablement. We only talk about our disablement and only talk about autism as in terms of how autistic people are disabled, and not in terms of like, well, we have this creative potential in the diversity of minds. But even more so, there are types of neurodivergence that have nothing to do with disability. Like, for instance, the neurodivergence that occurs from extensive meditation practice.
Yeah, you did talk about, and then you said synesthesia is another one.
Synesthesia, which can, I have a level of synesthesia that actually does involve disablement, because my synesthesia is intense enough that I can't drive safely, and so I'm disabled in a car-dependent culture. But a good deal of synesthesia is just cool special effects, and there's really not much that doesn't have a lot to do with
almost an enhancement.
Yeah, I don't even. Yeah, and certainly, but yeah, I'm saying like Zen masters are neurodivergent because extended meditation practice has altered their brain, and I'm multiply neurodivergent, and some of that is innate, being born autistic, and some of that is acquired and a problem and related to my disablement, right? Like extensive PTSD that I'm largely recovered from after decades of work. And some of it, the effect on my body mind of over 40 years of Aikido training and 30 years of Zazen practice, that's got nothing to do with disablement. But that's also legit neurodivergence. All the interesting things I did to my brain with psychedelics use that have persisted, that's intentionally acquired neurodivergence, nothing to do with the ways I'm disabled, but also falls within the umbrella of neurodivergence because it is divergence from dominant neurocognitive norms.
So basically, neurodivergence is it's all inclusive. It's pretty much anything that veers away from the typical, or the majority, the neuro majority. I'm learning these words. And neurodivergence is everything else. It's everything else. Now, how does that differ from neuroqueer? Like, I can say I'm neurodivergent because that's my birthright. That's kind of like what you said in in the book, some of us can say, I'm neurodivergent. I don't have to do anything to prove it. That's my birthright. I'm neurodivergent. And for some, it's acquired. But how is that different from being neuroqueer? Can I just say, well, I'm neuroqueer because I'm neurodivergent? Can I say that?
Well, they're different. And here's the interesting thing about neuroqueer is that when I originally coined that term in 2008, I did not conceive of it as an identity label, that it was a verb. And for me, it is, and always will be primarily a verb. And so, in that sense, I mean, one of the things that troubles me in public discourse in general, and in the discourse on neurodiversity, is this essentialist identity politics. So much about, you were born this way, and so you are this way, and everyone. It seems like the more of the master's tools to me. Everyone fits in some neat little box, and it's like. It is these beautiful, potentially rich and complex understandings of intersectionality of human identity become reduced to like a series of check boxes. How many of these boxes can you check? What groups do you belong to, and who are your allies and who aren't your allies based on what groups you belong to, and who gets listened to. And it's, I mean, that identity politics is always, it really, the way identity gets essentialized as, if you have this skin color, or were born in this place, or, like you can claim identity in this group, and it says certain things about you. And, I mean, it's funny because when people, often when you hear, people complain about identity politics, they're talking about progressive identity politics, or, it's the term they use now, woke identity politics. But I mean, right-wing politics are very oriented towards identity politics too. White supremacism is the ultimate on identity politics. Whiteness is created as an identity for specific purposes of, excluding certain people. And so, all of that is very, very much, just the whole like concept of race as embedded in, thought in North American thought, is identity politics really developed for the purpose of keeping people in separate boxes, and then creating hierarchies around that. So, not a fan of any of that. And I am a fan of queer theory, which largely rejects or queers identity politics, in the sense of viewing identity as fluid. And so queer theory views, gender as fluid and identity in general as fluid, because it's not about you were born this way and therefore you are this way. This is what you are. This is the box you fit in. But it's about you are what you do, and you can change what you do. And so neuroqueer, what I call neuroqueer theory, is very much about that. Neuroqueer theory really just takes queer theory and expands it into the realm of neurodiversity. So that's a sort of an expansion of queer theory, and an intersection between that and the neurodiversity paradigm. But Yeah, let me talk about what that is. And people do inevitably, because identity politics are so deeply baked into uh, societal discourse and how people think about themselves and each other, that people do use neuroqueer as an identity label. And, that's not like I can stop them. And if it is beneficial to people, if people feel empowered by using that, go for it, use it.
When I first heard the term, or when I first saw the term, I thought that the queer part was in reference to like the LGBTQ.
Oh, it
Right?
is.
Right. But it's not necessarily that.
Well, it is and it isn't.
Like, you don't have to be. I don't like to misspeak on this kind of topic, but you don't have to be queer in the sense of sexuality or gender to neuroqueer, right?
Well, you don't have to be to start out.
Okay.
Let's talk about
Let's talk
that.
about it.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Okay, so to um so can you run some queer theory 101 by you? And I do this in the book, but
You
I don't
do.
know that everyone's read the book. But basically, and this is Judith Butler was the kind of the biggest contributor to this particular aspect of queer theory, was this idea that uh, gender is performance, and that doesn't mean that it's like a stage performance. It doesn't mean that like gender is an act people put on. What it means is gender is a collection of habitual actions that people perform.
Like roles.
Yeah, people are trained to play societal roles, and those roles are made up of specific actions, ways of dressing, ways of moving, ways of speaking, ways of interacting, that are, it's like, this is how a man acts, this is how a woman acts, and
For sure.
that's the 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 dominant cultural construction of these gender roles is what we call heteronormativity, which says there's one right way to do gender and sexuality, and it involves binary, mutually exclusive gender roles, male and female. You're male or female, and there's a right way to do male, which includes being heterosexual, and a right way to do female, which includes being heterosexual. And so you have this heteronormativity going on of these roles that people are entrained to, and they're socially instilled and brutally socially enforced.
I was going to say enforced through,
Oh, heck yeah.
church and all of through
And
society in general. But I mean, really, it's
through
in the Bible, right? Like
through shame and violence too, just through I mean, people get those gender roles, people get their assigned gender roles instilled in them really deeply in childhood. And partly it's like, a lot of that is shame and violence. A lot of that is, girls don't do that, boys don't do that, and the violence that boys encounter if they,
even early on. Yeah.
From very early on, if they behave in a way that is outside of the assigned male gender role and dominant gender norms. And so okay, so you have this heteronormativity, these ways that like these are the normative rules of how you perform, how to be and act like a normal male or a normal female, which again, heterosexuality is a big part of that, and but not the entirety of it. It's all there's and
so much to it.
and there's so much to it, and you step outside it and you see, the way that uh, people who've been assigned a gender have been, people get an assigned gender if they step outside of the gender role, even in terms of how they walk or how they sit or how they gesture or how they talk, how they
You talk
dress.
about hand movements a lot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the uh um so anyway, queer theory, we have this idea these are normative habits of performance that are instilled and enforced socially, that are not they're not natural to people. They're not uh and uh, and that means they can be uh subverted and deviated from. One can diverge from normative performance, subvert it, actively defy it and go against it, or creatively tamper with it and customize it. And this is called queering. So queering is this way of being outside of the norm, being outside of getting outside of heteronormativity. So and actively subverting heteronormativity in one's own performance, or in one's interactions and relationships, or in the broader culture around one, or in particular spaces. Um, so so queering and queer theory is this subversion of heteronormativity. So uh, two there's two central principles to neuroqueer theory, and one is that neuronormativity functions much like heteronormativity in society, and
Repeat that.
neuronormativity functions much like heteronormativity in society. So, enforce standards of performance. In other words, nobody is born neurotypical. There's no such thing as a neurotypical brain. There's just people who are some people are more able than others to fit within the demands of neuronormative performance.
I really like the way you process that in the book, and talking about neurotypical is not really a thing. Just like you talked about stimming, it's what fits into that box without harming that person too much, or if it's easy enough.
Yeah, I mean, neurotypical is a thing. It's a term we use. Again, it's rejecting essentialism. People aren't born neurotypical. It's a term we use for people who are capable of spending their lives in relative comfort within the confines of neuronormative performance, and who are doing that, as opposed to the people who are diverging from that neuronormative performance. So, anyways, first principle is that neuronormativity functions like heteronormativity in that sense. It's a socially instilled and socially enforced performance, which means that it can be queered. It can be, one can subvert it and diverge from it and such. And some people, just like heteronormativity, some people can't help but do that. Some people are just gay, 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 and that's not, they can't like suppress that. They're just they're very obviously, very clearly, very explicitly gay,
For sure.
and they're just not going to fit in that heteronormative box at all. They cannot make themselves stay inside it, and um, there's just no way they can convincingly perform heterosexual gender normativity.
And
And
true for neuronormativity. There are people
exactly,
that cannot. There's just no way.
yeah. If you're, if if you're autistic, certain kinds, certain manifestations of being autistic, and especially, if you're, an autistic person who doesn't do, doesn't do oral speech,
Mm-hmm.
or you're just, the way your body mind is working. There's
For sure.
constant visible stimming and rocking and such, and verbal tics and echolalia and such. Like, you're not going to fit in that box of neuronormativity. You queer it just by being who you are.
Right.
But you know just because a person is capable of forcing themselves to stay within the box of heteronormativity doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit. And same with neuronormativity. Like, sure, there's autistic people who can learn to mask, but it's stressful. And there's people who are not autistic, but they don't fit well into that box of neuronormativity. They do better when they're stimming and letting their brains be uniquely weird. I mean, really, everybody does better outside this box of neuronormativity. So anyway, uh, neuronormativity can be queered like heteronormativity. That's our first principle of neuroqueer theory. The second, and this is key, and it relates to what you were asking about before in terms of, do you have to be queer in the LGBTQ sense? Neuronormativity and heteronormativity are entwined. They are inextricable from each other.
Can you
They,
explain that?
yeah, I hope. But I mean, I think when you are so heteronormative performance is pervasive. Heteronormativity is pervasive, and what I mean by that is not just it's everywhere and being reinforced from everywhere, from like, every TV show that's not intentionally queer, and just every societal message we get, and it's built into just the whole idea that there are boys clothes and girls clothes. I mean, heteronormativity is
Girls' toys, yeah.
right. Heteronormativity is pervasive in that sense, but heteronormativity is also pervasive in that the rules of heteronormative performance pervade everything we do. There's a right heteronormative way to do everything. And where, like, I mean,
how you sit.
I've seen, I saw that in elementary school and junior high school. I see, boys, or at least people who were assigned the male role at birth, bullied for walking like a girl, or which might not actually look anything like how the girls were walking. It just doesn't look like how the other boys were walking. Right? Sitting like a girl.
Most girls didn't walk like that either, but yeah.
Right. Even like holding your pencil like a girl. What does that even mean?
Like a girl.
Right. And girls too, like, right, they get bullied by their peers for, like, being lesbian, not regardless of whether they're actually showing any attraction to women, just like if they're not performing femininity according to some really, narrow, pervasive societal standard in every way, in like how they talk and how they gesture and such, and how it's just so it's pervasive in that sense. It pervades everything we do, has to be done, according to the rules of heteronormativity. And the same thing is true of neuronormativity. Like, everything has to be done normal. So, you
within society's context.
Within, and the two overlap and pervade. And if you look at, like, when I mean, I learned this stuff early, just growing up, just being a kid and watching the world around me. Like, the neurodivergent kids got bullied for being gay all the time. It's not that they were gay; it's that they weren't performing heteronormativity because they were moving differently and talking differently from the neurotypical kids.
I see
And
what you're saying. Yeah.
if you look at like ABA and how it's intended to condition, autistic kids into this neuronormative performance, what is that? What is the imaginary normal kid that kids that ABA tries to condition kids to act like? It's a heteronormative kid.
Mm-hmm.
There's no ABA practitioner who's like, I'm going to help your autistic child act like a healthy, neurotypical, gender fluid kid.
Right.
So like, I'm gonna make your kid act like a normal boy, or I'm gonna make your kid act like a normal girl.
Right.
And so the heteronormativity is inseparable from the neuronormativity. They're intertwined, they're inseparable. They're two different facets of the same cluster of normativity. And so that means not just that they can both be queered, but that if you queer one, inevitably at some point you're also queering the other. So it's not that to engage in neuroqueering you like have to be LGBTQ. It's that if you engage in neuroqueering enough, you are inevitably also queering your gender performance.
Mm-hmm.
You will be part of that LGBTQ spectrum eventually because you're going to be queer. You're going to deviate from the normative gender performance eventually. And, that's...
because they're just so intertwined, it's inevitable.
Yeah. And again, I'm really struck by how, having been immersed in the world of Aikido and Zen, I'm really struck by how these transformative practices that alter one neurocognitively over time, like the people who get very advanced at them, develop this androgyny to them. They're no longer stuck in binary gender roles.
It's like an elevation from that or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a what do you call that?
Transcendence.
Yeah, that.
Right? Yeah, master. There's something there where there are qualities that we would read in heteronormativity as being extremely feminine happening there, or if the person started out as female, there's qualities that we'd read as very masculine because there's something that transcends the binary gender roles at certain, Aikido too, I see it, that it's necessary. There's at the higher levels of the art, there's a necessary queering that happens to advance further into the art, because one has to have this kind of shape-shifting capacity in terms of one expanding one's capacity to be both direct and receptive alternately.
Like you're not a boy or a girl anymore, you're a ninja.
Yes, you have you have a ninja stealth gender.
Right.
So so I think again, so when I talk about neuroqueering, it really is, it's about queering neuronormativity, but that also queers heteronormativity. And if a person, the more a person queers their performance of neuronormativity, the more they're queering the performance of heteronormativity. And it goes the other way around too, I think. I think that when one gets queer enough in terms of heteronormativity, when one deviates from heteronormativity enough in the LGBTQ sense, one is inevitably creating neurodivergence, queering neuronormativity as well. I mean, what this experience of being transgender and doing gender transition, which, I'm at the very early stages of a transition journey. I'm actually like unshaven because I'm growing my facial hair out for a facial electrolysis appointment. So I'm like,
I
I'm
remember you
really
talking about that. Yeah.
I'm really in like the early stages of not on hormones or anything yet, in the early stages of my transition, and the but the process, like we have our brain has these neural maps in it of our whole body, and the where body minds and we have our neural pathways are developed in terms of what we do with our bodies and such. And if you're when you're doing a gender transition and altering your gender performance radically, and even there's bodily alterations since your brain has to create new maps over the old ones, you are definitely queering yourself neurocognitively in the course of changing your gender,
For sure, man. I
or
understand that. Right.
changing yourself to match, to match the gender that you're vibing with. So, um, yeah, I think that it's so part of this concept of neuroqueering is this acknowledgement. Part of this sort of what the term implies is this acknowledgement uh, of how neuronormativity and heteronormativity are entwined, to where really you queer one far enough and you're queering both. You queer the performance of one, you're queering the performance of the other, and you're actually altering your consciousness. You alter your consciousness enough, you start altering your gender. You start altering your gender performance away from from heteronormativity enough, you are reshaping your consciousness and your neurocognitive modes of functioning. So neuroqueering is, an action. Neuroqueer, again, for me, started out as a verb, and this idea that these modes of normativity can be queered through intentional action. And in terms of people using, and that's something anyone can do. That's something anyone
I
can do,
saw
and
that in
I
the book.
recommend that everybody do it. It's not about how you're born. It's not about being born like. It's not about being born gay or being born autistic. It's something anyone can do, and that is. Uh, anybody can choose to not perform heteronormativity anymore. And it takes work because that's deep conditioning. For some people, it's like that conditioning never takes because they're so clearly not their assigned gender, or so clearly not attracted to the gender that heteronormativity says you're supposed to be attracted to. And so there's just no way they're going to fit within heteronormativity. But just because you can fit within it doesn't mean that it's fun, doesn't mean that it's not limiting. So anyone can become fabulously queer and start, customizing their gender performance and deviating from heteronormativity. And same thing with neuronormativity. Like, yeah, some of us are born autistic or neurodivergent in other ways, but anyone can decide, I'm not going to perform neuronormativity anymore. I'm going to practice stimming. I'm going to do these exotic meditation techniques. I'm going to take all these psychedelic drugs. I'm going to people can decide, and do decide regularly, I'm going to mutate my consciousness. I'm going to step outside. I'm going to explore these things and see where it takes me, and just let myself lean into my weirdness and embody it. And there's this cycle that happens. There's this escalating cycle of weirdness. I mean, normativity is an escalating cycle. You do normative performance and the brain gets duller and duller, and, stays more and more within the confines of normative thought. But you start getting weirder and embodying your capacities for weirdness more, you alter consciousness, you build new neural pathways, and that can inspire more weirdness. It opens up more possibilities for being queerer and queerer. And sooner or later, you're not doing normative gender performance anymore either. And your brain has gone, your body mind has gone totally weird. And so, yeah, this is what I'm in favor of, and it is a radical. Like I say, I'm a heretic because it is a radical rejection of identity politics and of the identity politics, in particular, that have come to infest the neurodiversity movement. And I think I see the neurodiversity movement as very the potentials of neurodiversity and of the human neurodiversity in general and the neurodiversity paradigm. I think the potentials of it as a source of cultural creativity have been artificially constrained by the fact that because the neurodiversity movement started out as a social justice movement, it's become infested with identity politics and with this essentialism and, oh, you had to be born this way to be one of us. And screw that. I want everyone.
Join us, won't you?
Yeah, I want everyone to be fabulously queer and fabulously neurodivergent and fabulously weird. And it is accessible to everyone through intentional practice and action.
And in your book, I was trying to find it, but in your book, you talk about some ways that people just in regular life can neuroqueer. Like we had Chloe Ferrara on.
I love Chloe.
And they talk about like in their college level or like university level classes, how they are. I mean, to me, this seems like neuroqueering, which is like basically creating spaces and environments where you can be who the hell you are, right? So
yes.
You don't have to talk. You don't have to talk. You don't even have to interact. You can just be here if you want to. You can lay on the floor. You can, do some jumping jacks over there, as long as you're in the house. And creating that type of space is neuroqueering. Is that right?
Exactly. You're neuroqueering the space. That's a cultural neuroqueering. So you can neuroqueer the external world, neuroqueer a space simply by creating spaces where people don't have to perform normativity. And then and then there's neuroqueering of the body mind, which I tend to focus on because, I'm just, I'm a psychology professor. I'm a somatic psychologist. I'm a practitioner of transformative somatic work. And so I'm very much looking at that, how can we self-transform through action?
I mean, I get that that's what you focus on, but you really do neuroqueer spaces just by being yourself and making sure your space is comfortable for you, really. I mean, if it's comfortable for you, it'll probably be comfortable for everybody, and because you want it to be comfortable for everybody. Like you're correct me if I'm wrong, but you're neuroqueering the curriculum.
Yes.
Cool.
Absolutely.
You're basically saying like, fuck the man on this, right? Like that's what neuroqueering is. It is what they call non-compliant.
Non-compliant. It is. And there's an intentionality to it, which I think is crucial. And this is where it differs. In a sense, it's an intentional neurodivergence and intentional divergence from heteronormativity. So, you can be born neurodivergent. You can become neurodivergent through trauma or accident or whatever. There's all sorts of ways of being neurodivergent. Neuroqueering is different from that because it is about intentional neurodivergence. It's about um, I am really gonna lean into these potentials for creative divergence from neuronormativity. And so it's again it's a way of engaging with neurodivergence or with potentials for neurodivergence that's very different from I have happened to end up neurodivergent.
I got to show this comment. This is Angelina. So thankful for this conversation. I was intimidated before, but we'll be ordering my copy shortly. I'm telling you, I was intimidated too, but really it's fabulous. It is a fabulous book. It's wonderful. And it's not as intimidating as I thought it would be, right? Like it's more inclusive than I thought it would be. Like, I feel like I want to strive to neuroqueer, right? Like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I do have the Megan. Oh yes, I do have a question for you before we leave, because I don't want to. I know that we said 90 minutes. It's been 90 minutes
I'm
already.
happy to go a little longer and cover more.
Okay,
I'm
so
totally fine with going all the way till, I don't know, what time zone are you in again?
Eastern is 3:37 here.
Well, I'm happy to go till 4 if that suits us. We'll see where it takes us. But hit me up with the Megan question because I'm so curious now.
Okay, so you already answer this in the book, so I want you just have to figure out something else to say.
Okay.
This is actually a chapter in her book, so you know she gets me. So if you had one piece of advice, one for parents of newly diagnosed autistic children, parents that don't know anything about this, if you had one piece of advice for those parents, what would it be?
Don't freak out. Don't freak out. Yeah, that was.
I love that. Don't freak out.
Don't freak out, man. Don't panic. Yeah, that's where it starts. You know, I mean, you really seriously, our society, you know, has this. As a society, we project our collective shadow onto autistic people, and other groups as well. You know, trans people these days, for instance. But autistic people are very much recipients of this collective shadow projection, and so there's this a societal air of autismophobic panic. There's like this sort of the way, you know, in the 1950s, you know, there was the anti-communist panic, like, oh my God, what if my neighbor is a communist, you know, and there's that like this fear of autism. I mean, where
talk about where that comes from in the book too. But
yeah,
I mean, yeah.
And a lot of it's shadow projection. I think a lot of it is shadow projection. A lot of this autismophobia in society comes from the fact that neuronormativity is really uncomfortable for everyone, and everybody has, in a sense, been traumatized by being forced into the box of neuronormativity. And so there's this fear of maybe I'm not, you know, maybe I'm not normal, and that gets projected onto autistic people. Autistic people, like, not autistic people even so much as autism as an abstract. Like, autistic people are in a sense not seen because in the pathology paradigm, you know, people look at the autism as this thing that, like, children are, that, you know, this force that steals people's children.
Stealing our children, right?
Right. So anyway, so I think there really is a panic, and when one is in the grip of a panic, or what, you know, like you know, the old school, you know, like Jungian analysts would call, like, here I'm being a psych professor again, you know, what the Jungian analysts would call a complex, you know, when one is like in the grips of a complex, it's like this culturally this culturally instilled set of panics and reactions and knee-jerk responses and acquired mental images, and it uh, that sort of panic is the enemy of rational thought that we see, historically, in witch hunts and lynch mobs where people are lynched who are obviously like it's just people being targeted because of a panic that's existing in the minds of the perpetrators. The actual targets are not being seen clearly because rational thought uh, is shut off by fear, as they say in Dune, right? Fear is the mind killer. And so I think that autistic-phobic panic that pervades the discourse on autism means that parents, hear autism or think about autism in terms of their kids, find out their kid is autistic or might be autistic, and the panic kicks in and it prevents rational thought. And I mean, you look at like the success of the ABA industry, in selling itself to parents.
The marketing campaign has just been
Right,
successful and
right.
overall, right?
But behaviorism as a scientific paradigm, behaviorism as a technique for working with anyone is discredited, has been discredited for decades. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, Noam Chomsky published his critiques of behaviorism and just tore it apart. And it's like nobody, in the world of academic psychology outside of the discourse on autism, nobody takes radical Skinnerian behaviorism seriously as like this is a viable method for human transformation. But rational thought goes out the window with autistic-phobic panic. And so like people just do absolutely absurdly irrational things in the face of that panic, like ABA, right? Leaning on, imagining that somehow this could possibly be good for a child.
Well, but I think I'm gonna like just challenge you a little bit on that, Nick, because I don't think that the parent. Okay, so on a base level, at the doctor's office or at the wherever we are, parents don't know that it has been challenged and that it doesn't work. They're told that it does. Like I feel like there's this these forces like that are just bigger than us, like coming in and like
absolutely.
it wasn't good until I learned otherwise, right?
Why are the parents listening? Like there's so many other instances where parents turn down their doctor's advice, right? I mean, there's parents who won't get their children vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And, that's part of some of that is the autistic-phobic panic again. But again, like that panic is such that parents won't get their children vaccinated, even though getting them vaccinated would be the rational thing to do. But they will subject their children to ABA on their doctor's advice. So it's like, it's whether they're following their doctor's advice or not changes. The key thing is they're driven by the terror of autism. They're driven by autistic-phobic panic here. So they're not, making the rational decisions and really just like thinking about, well, let me, I mean, and a lot of it is, of course, that, yeah, like most people in our society today are scientifically illiterate, and our schools don't teach people critical thinking, and in fact actively discourage critical thinking. So there's all of that playing into it. but still, I think there's a rationality and an empathy that would keep parents from doing ABA or in, whatever horrible things they do, giving their children bleach enemas or all the other completely off the wall
Right.
things people do to try to keep their kids from being autistic.
Like that they would
Um,
never do to
they
another child, that
right,
they would never think of doing that to a child.
right, but they don't think they're doing it to a child. They're doing it to
I see what
the
you're saying.
autism because, again, that state of panic, they're freaking out, and
I see what
so
you're saying. Yeah.
I think that really don't panic, don't freak out. That is the number one thing. Like the first thing to do is keep calm and continue to think empathically and rationally, and it's hard to do. That's um you know that's a whole other thing for both, traumatized autistic people and parents of autistic kids and such. Most people do not know how to calm the heck down and be uh and trauma and societal panic and personal panic and our various personal triggers and societal pressures to be outraged or offended by this or that. All of these things like push people into higher and higher states of uh, panic, of irrationality and lack of empathy and reactivity, and most people don't know how to reverse that because that is
A freight train.
yeah, but that's a skill
Mhm.
that's not taught. Like that's part of um for me the somatic, working with the body, and that ability to take control over our own body minds is a big part of is such a big part of my work and such a running theme for me in neuroqueering and in my work as a somatic psychologist. And um, I think that in my work as an Aikido teacher, very much, I mean, that's where it started for me, was starting Aikido training at a very early age. And just, um, I think that there is pervasively in society, and we see this in the discourse on around, queerness and around autism and just sort of the general like polarized culture wars that go on and play out in the public sphere and on social media and such. Uh, People do not know how to calm the heck down, and uh, so they live in a state of reactivity that kills rationality and kills empathy, and people just lash out at each other all the time, lash out at themselves, like for like who's the enemy, and oh, I have to get into this flame war because I'm offended, because like, they don't have that capacity to just calm themselves down. And it's
Don't freak out.
telling someone to calm down does not work because it's in fact it just makes it worse. It's triggering for a lot of people to be told to calm down and relax,
Right.
but it's unhelpful advice, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that it's unhelpful because people don't know how to do it. Like
It would
uh,
be best if they did not get into the panic in the first place.
right,
Right.
but staying unpanicked or getting oneself out of a panic or out of a reactive state of being, you know, being triggered, being, or just, being reactive, being caught up in uh, fear and panic and conflict and outrage and like staying out of that or getting oneself out of that is a skill. It's a physical skill that can be practiced. And uh, and it starts to give us choices where we don't have to be triggered and governed by our traumas and governed by reactivity. And That is, that's kind of, I mean, that's going to be that's the next time I write a book, that's going to be a major focus of it, because, no healthy discourse and creative discourse and human reconciliation and healing can occur without that capacity. Most people don't know how to do it, and in fact, are reactive and outraged and offended if one, and triggered if one even suggests that it's possible to not be. So yeah, like, don't freak out, man. Calm down. That's like my advice to parents of autistic kids and to everyone, and to, autistic activists. Like, it doesn't mean, don't do anything about it doesn't mean, like, don't do anything about horrific abuses and injustices that are happening. Uh, I think that if one is not reactive and is able to calm down and think rationally and strategically, one can actually fight abuses and oppressions more effectively.
More effectively.
So, and I think people hear me talk about that, about like, oh, just don't be offended by that. Don't get pulled into the outrage. Say, build the positive. And people think, oh my God, I must be speaking from a place of enormous privilege. But, most of the people who I hear say that come from a place of a lot more privilege than I do, in terms of, I mean, I grew up in poverty. My parents were negligent, abusive drug addicts. I spent big chunks of my young adulthood homeless. Massive trauma, and it's just that I'm old, and I
You put in a lot of work
in the
to
work.
learn how to do that.
Put in the work, and uh, most people aren't aware that the work is possible and are offended at the suggestion that it might be possible for them, which is very strange. The idea, like, people really uh, seem often to get upset at the idea that a better quality of life is available to them through practice. And it wasn't like, oh, I got into a position of, like, economic stability and having a, college degree and stuff like that by, it's not like I got there and then I was able to start healing from my trauma. I was doing the work of healing the trauma and such, while I was homeless. I was continuing my Aikido practice and all that. I was, like, in traumatizing situations, but still actively insisting on doing that work. You don't have to wait for your situation to be perfect. You do the work of, you start doing that work of healing and of learning to center yourself and take responsibility for your own inner states. You start doing that work wherever you are. And that eventually helps you develop the capacity to act more strategically and get yourself into better situations, ideally.
It kind of reminds me of the work that I've done, like, just in counseling over the years, like, of intrusive thoughts, kind of like
Uh-huh.
recognizing that this is an intrusive thought, saying to yourself, like, go away or whatever, or like, or counteracting that with post-its that I leave around my house. I mean, that's just things that me and my therapist had come up with, but it kind of reminds me of that, just being mindful of that. And there are books that can help do that type of work as well.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have access to, like, a counselor or something, there's lots of different things on that. I don't want to call it mindfulness because I don't know what mindfulness is. Like, I don't know what that is, but it's being mindful of, like, this is happening. Oh gosh, I am going from green to red on, like, a anxiety scale, and kind of learning how to just recognize that, and, like, that this reaction I'm having is not actually helping me at all. Like, this type of freak out is not helping me. What else can I do, kind of thing. I don't know, kind of brought that up to my mind.
Yep. Yep. So, any last questions for me here?
I don't think so. this has been fantastic. I'm stealing food. Get the book, Neuroqueer Heresies. Thank you, Dr. Nikki Walker,
Thank you so much.
coming on with us. And thank you to all the book lovers who I saw all of your comments, or maybe I did, maybe I missed some of them, but thank you so much for interacting with us. This will be on the YouTube channel after we are done. And I will see y'all in the book club. Nick, hold on just a second. I'm going to end the broadcast and we'll be back in the studio. Bye, everyone.